All right. Good evening. Welcome to the program. You're listening to the Soapbox, 90.9, 104.1 WMPG, Southern Maine's community radio from the University of Southern Maine. My name is Eric Poulin. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. This is your Soapbox as well, and we'll be having a conversation tonight, but we strongly encourage you to call in 780-4909. Call in with comments, questions, join the conversation. With whom will you be conversing? Pat Taub, a local author, freelance author, activist, feminist, is here in the studio in WMPG studios. Thanks for being here, Pat. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Pat, I think it might be wise to just jump right into the conversation. And I was hoping we could start with let's sort of assume that the majority of our listeners may have some common misperceptions about what feminism is. And so maybe you could just explain to our listeners what exactly is feminism, or more specifically, what was it? And what is it currently? And so how has it changed, and in what direction do you see it? That's a big question. Maybe you can just...
No, that's okay. I think the one constant is feminism from its very beginnings, from what's called the first wave in this country, which was the end of the 19th and the 20th century, was concerned about equality for women. It's had different mutations, but let me give you a really quick historical overview. The first wave of feminism was known as the suffragette movement, and there were incredible women in that movement. They were so courageous, and you know, it's quite sad to me that a lot of that history has been forgotten, but there is this historian, Gerda Lerner, who's written about it a lot. So anyhow, they were the women who really worked hard for the right to vote, and people may know of the Seneca Falls Convention, where women met from all over the country, essentially, to work on those goals. And there was this whole culture. There were women's newspapers and magazines that were radical and wonderful. The one fact that I have to tell you about, because I'm so charmed by it, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, that a lot of people know about, who was one of the pioneers in the movement, actually got together with a group of women and wrote the Women's Bible. Now, the Bible at that point in time was probably the primary reading source. There weren't a lot of books. They penciled out every sort of reference to patriarchy and ways women were subjugated. You can imagine the backlash. I mean, this is the sort of guts they
What
had.
was left? I wonder.
Yeah, really, what was left? So that was so the right to vote was won in 1920, and their efforts were rewarded. The second wave of feminism is what I identify with. That grew out of the Vietnam anti-war movement. That's historically around the beginning 70s, 80s, and that was concerned with reproductive rights, a battle we still fight, with equal pay for equal work, a battle we still fight. And also there was a real focus on greater criminal penalties for rape and domestic violence, and that's when the whole notion of shelters for domestic violence sprung up. So, and of course, that was an exciting time because women were gathering in communities and consciousness-raising groups and speaking intensely about their experience and deconstructing everything they had been taught. And this is another sort of humorous thing that came to me as I was thinking about it. I went to a consciousness-raising group probably in the early 70s, and I was newly married, and the women then were often separatists. I mean, they were really kind of like the Black Panthers, I think. Maybe in the beginning, movements have to be so strongly identified that...
What do you mean exactly by separatists?
They didn't have any time for men. I mean, it was like women all the way. Here's an example. So I went to an early CR group, and this woman noticed I was married, and she said, "Oh, you sleep with the oppressor." I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we sort of went on with. So anyway, the second wave lasted, I don't know, it sort of petered out in the 80s. And there were a lot of problems with the second wave. It was very elitist. And Betty Friedan, who is credited with starting the second wave with the feminine mystique, founded now the National Organization of Women, but she didn't want any lesbians at their first convention. So, and I think straight women and lesbians sort of never found a way to work together that effectively during the second wave. The third wave of...
What was behind that, do you think?
I don't know.
Was it homophobia? Or
Probably. And the second wave, too, didn't do a very good job of incorporating women of color and of other ethnic minorities. I mean, it's still an issue. So the third wave came about in the 90s. There were two young women, Amy Richards and Jennifer Baumgarten, who wrote a book called Manifesta. They really said we have to be inclusive. We have to have a place for lesbians, for transgendered women. And there was a lot of emphasis on women owning their sexuality, which I had a lot of conversations with third wave feminists because I felt like if you want agency, which means that's what we fought for in the second wave. You want to have your own authority, but I felt like women were objectifying themselves, and I still kind of feel that way.
Well, so let's unpack that a little bit. When you say own their sexuality, what exactly are you? What exactly do you mean by that?
Third wave feminists, like I had conversations with Amy and Jennifer, and they said it's our bodies; we can do whatever we want. So women became much freer in deciding who they were going to sleep with and have sex with and that kind of thing.
But you feel it swung too far in the other direction and they started to objectify themselves?
I think some of that went on. I don't think it was their intention, but I think they might have been read like that. I don't know.
And so in what way did you see that happening?
I saw it happening with a lot of young women who were saying, I'm free to have sex whenever I want, but they weren't really happy, I think, with a lot of the results. Maybe it wasn't in their DNA. I don't think women have yet figured out that they do have a sexual freedom, kind of what to do with it, you know? I mean, that may be a whole other topic. I don't know. And
that's probably a whole other show for sure.
But I don't want to get like too hung up on that.
Sure.
And so this is kind of where we are now. I do believe that what's the fourth wave going to be? Well, unfortunately, I think the corporate media, often tells people what to think and what to believe. And now what's being projected so much and what I hear on NPR and what I read is this kind of capitalist feminism. The conversation seems to be centered on Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg's book about how women can make it in the corporate world and be a capitalist-driven success like men, and sort of forsaking, I think, the time-honored feminist principles of working for peace, working for equality, supporting our sisters who don't have any money, who don't have health care, who can't afford child care, immigrant women who are losing their children and husbands because they're being deported. That's Obama's abysmal record. So I just get so angry when I hear women talking on NPR about whether or not they should stay home. That is such a privileged decision. Why can't women who are well educated try to have those kind of opportunities for other women like they do in Western Europe? When a woman has a baby, she can stay home for a year. Nurses come into the home in France for new mothers.
But isn't that sort of the typical of the dominant class or force, particularly within capitalism? You co-opt what frightens you, and you turn it into something that is relatively benign. We were just talking about how historical figures have been sanitized by the system, essentially, and so powerful forces like Martin Luther King Jr. has been severely sanitized, over the decades, and has been made into something safe, when in actuality, he was a pretty radical threat to the system as it existed.
Absolutely.
Feminism is the same way. And now I agree. I think you see this sort of toothless manifestation of feminism. And so what would you rather see it as? What do you see as sort of the core values that should be driving feminists right now?
Well, I think an egalitarian feminism should replace a capitalist feminism. And I think we have to work outside the system. I think this notion that Hillary's going to be president and then do all this stuff for women is baloney. It's like identity politics gone wrong. Just because she's a woman doesn't mean she's going to represent women. Let me give you a case in point. The UN passed a resolution in the year 2000, I think it's called Resolution 1835, that says women are to have a pivotal place at the peace table. Hillary was Secretary of State and went on and on and on about how they were liberating the women in Afghanistan. Did she ever once invite any Afghan women to the peace table? No. This is what I mean by faux feminism, and feminism as identity politics gone wrong.
I think the fact that they've been liberated might be news to the women in Afghanistan.
Yeah, really. I know a great local woman from Afghanistan. She would be a wonderful guest.
Good.
But anyway, so I think we really have to work outside the constriction of the Democratic and Republican Party, which are basically the same and have really abandoned a progressive agenda. We have to have, the old notion about more grassroots action, more feet on the street. And we have to find a way, this is true for any progressive issue, to build a mass movement. It's the only way we're going to affect change. There are more of us than there are of them. So I'd like feminism to get back to the principles of compassion and caring for one another, for all women. I mean, for men too, but feminism is principally concerned about the inequalities that women suffer. So let's have a women's convention like they did at Seneca Falls in the 1800s. Let's start it up again, and sort of parcel out these issues.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Pat Taub, local writer and activist. We're discussing feminism. Please feel free to call us up, 780-4909. This is the Soapbox on WMPG. And my name is Eric. I happen to know that you've been instrumental in bringing Adolph Reed Jr. To Maine on May 10th.
Right, in Brunswick.
In Brunswick.
At the public library.
Yeah.
At 6:30. We'll do another one at the end.
Yeah. And so I kind of, what you were just getting at, I think something he points out, Ralph Nader has pointed out, and even Fredericks, someone who called into my show last week, made this point beautifully, which is that there's seemingly no cohesive, progressive vision to unify people, and we've become very factionalized. There are environmentalists, there are gay rights activists, there are feminists. How do you see feminism fitting into the broader progressive activist picture of, and how do you see it contributing to moving the country in a more productive, progressive direction?
Well, in a lot of ways. I mean, one way that I think current feminists are consistent, with the old feminist principles. I have to take a sip of wine.
Sure, no problem. 780-4909 if you want to join the conversation.
And that is from the very beginning, feminism in this country, that is from the time of Julia Ward Howe in the 1870s, has been concerned about peace. The original Mother's Day proclamation was one encouraging women everywhere to really work for peace. As Julia Ward Howe said, "I will not send my son to war to kill another mother's son." And this has been consistent. The feminists during World War I had a women's peace party, which we don't know about because history erases all this stuff that doesn't fit with the sort of standard model. And Code Pink, the women's peace and justice group I'm part of, continues to work with women all over the world. Like, we've been really active in the anti-drone campaign, and we went to Pakistan and met with mothers there. So anyway, there are lots of groups that are concerned about peace, and particularly our crazy defense budget, which is just cutting away so many social programs that we desperately need. So we can unify around that, and I think it could be really a common denominator that would involve people of color, disadvantaged people. But we progressives just have to build a mass movement, and I don't know how it's going to happen, but there has to be a way that we reach out to one another. I know there's still old socialists who believe that we have to bring labor in. And I think that's tricky, though, because the labor union's been so decimated. There's so many jobs going overseas. But we do have to appeal to people who are being so badly hurt by this great inequality. So I think there's a lot of commonality. I think all of us who are just compassionate in nature want to help one another, and the environment is huge.
Yeah, I think you're right. I see sort of a through line of equality through most progressive issues, and my understanding of feminism has always been that it's really about equality. It's not about raising one gender over the other.
Right.
It's about righting the inequality that has existed. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right. In the early days, Gloria Steinem famously said, women's liberation is men's liberation too, because we're all constricted by gender roles.
Right.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, and I think a lot of men, have felt threatened by that. Their positions of relative power and safety in society, they maybe felt were being threatened. when in actuality, like Gloria Steinem was saying, I think that it's best for all of society to have actual equality. I was going to ask you, I wonder about that first wave. You talked about how they were really quite militant and even pretty
Radical.
separatist.
Yeah.
I wonder if they did more harm than good in terms of the subsequent...
suffragettes?
Well, no. I don't mean to say that. I mean...
You mean the second wave?
Maybe that's the one I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah. In terms of the image of feminism, I think, the general public, maybe as a result of that separatist militancy, views feminism as a fairly extreme, sort of counterproductive movement, an alienating sort of exclusive movement, as opposed to a welcoming, inclusive movement.
Well, it didn't stay there. I mean, the second wave had growing pains like any movement. And it may be, there were women who said anytime a woman has sex with a man, it's rape or something. But it didn't. That was Andrea Dworkin, I think. But it shifted out of that. But it may be that some of that stayed because that was a way to sort of minimize it or downplay it or mark it as dangerous. I think feminism was threatening, but it's interesting to me too the way reproductive rights are now under siege, and there's this vengeance with which men in power are going after women who want to just not have children that they can't afford. A friend of mine, now I'm sort of getting off on a tangent, but a friend of mine who's an abortion doctor said, which is a very brave role to have in society today. His life is always somewhat in danger. Mm-hmm. He said, no woman has an abortion because they don't like kids. It's because they love children. They just don't have a place in their lives, emotionally or financially. But why are women suddenly be attacked? I think women have always been threatening. I mean, this is just my theory. Because from the beginning of time, there's something about women's power to create life that's been unsettling to men. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But clearly women are being scapegoated now. And and I resent that we have to spend so much energy fighting for reproductive rights when there's so many other issues, Mm-hmm. But it's there, mm-hmm. and it's got to be addressed.
I wonder what you think about Camille Paglia. She wrote this piece in the Wall Street Journal, a feminist defense of masculine virtues. She talks a lot about pretty provocative things. She's pretty praising of the military, and she says the military is out of fashion. Americans undervalue manual labor, schools neuter male students, opinion makers deny the biological differences between men and women. She even goes so far as to say, this is a quote now, if civilization had been left in female hands, we would still be living in grass huts. So this woman calls herself a feminist. I wonder what you think about that and how you think, the point she's trying to make, which is apparently that masculinity is somehow under threat, how that fits into feminism and a progressive movement.
Well, Camille's always been a thorn in the side of feminists. I mean, I think she's rather a sensationalist. She always has consistently found a way to try to undercut feminism. And she's really smart, but I don't remember ever reading anything of hers that seemed to be sympathetic to what feminism is all about.
How is it that she defines herself as a feminist, I wonder?
I don't know. I haven't really read anything of hers in a long time, so I'm a little hard-pressed to find that. There must be a part of her that certainly believes in women's equality, but she has always been there, just kind of like, I don't know. I don't consider her a friend of feminism, and I don't think most women would,
Well, we don't have to talk too much about her, but the point that she was making in that article is one that has popped up somewhat curiously in other areas, including locally. I think it was a writer, I don't remember her name, Susan Dench, maybe? Is that a person?
Yeah, I know. It could be.
She wrote for the Bangor Daily News something along similar lines, that somehow masculinity is under threat and women, particularly feminists, are to blame. Does this strike you as a valid concern?
What is masculinity? Let's talk about what's your sense about what she means by masculinity?
Well, she's speaking in very stereotypical terms.
Right.
Masculine traits and activities like, building things and,
Football.
yeah,
and-
sports loving. But I mean,
I want it to be under threat. I mean, I don't like the sort of dominant, athletic culture, the military culture. Yeah, I'm all for having it under threat. There's far too much of it in the world. I don't want to preserve it. I don't want to preserve sons and going off to war and guys getting brain injuries because they're playing football and they're treated like the Romans treated the gladiators or something. I totally want it under threat.
I had, I guess a few months ago now, I had Alex Steed. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a blogger for Bangor Daily News and a local activist as well. And we had a whole show about gender and masculinity and what it is to be a man, really. And we don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I think it's an interesting discussion in as much as, these are completely fabricated social constructs
Right.
that we design and for whatever reason we ascribe meaning
Right.
to. And that's not to say that that's not valuable. I mean, one can find meaning
Right.
in social constructs, but I feel like where we go wrong is where we impose those social constructs on other people or force our expectations on other people. Like, for example, I care very much about being a good man. But if you were to ask me what it means to be a good man, I would lay out a number of characteristics which might stereotypically be referred to as feminine. But that doesn't necessarily threaten my conception of what it is to be a good man. So, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, can't we just be a good person?
Well, that's ultimately what I'm...
Yeah, but I also think the transgendered movement is really exciting in that it's blurring all these rather fixed ideas about men and women, and it's letting young kids kind of experiment with more of that. And little girls sometimes are much more aggressive than they might be, and little boys can really be soft and gentle. And I think that has the potential to get us out of a lot of these really fixed, ascribed ways of being. I'm not sure I answered your question. Do we need to sort of look at it some more?
Well, I mean, I think it's a tricky thing.
Yeah, it is.
Gender in particular is a tricky thing, and it's so personal. I feel like I would like to just kind of see people take a step back and respect that fact. And if someone, as long as they're not harming anyone else, if someone says they want to be a good person or a good man or a good woman, whatever that is to them, let them have it. That's sort of how I feel. Or is that destructive? Is that,
No, I think that's fine. And I think there really are different ways that men and women sort of think and process things. We all know that. And I think we have to respect that. Traditionally, women are more emotional, and women love to talk about their feelings like all the time. And
right,
men
but
have a hard time with
biological
that.
or is that cultural?
Oh, I think it's cultural.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
But some of it could be related to women being mothers and nurturing and being really hypersensitive to how little children are. I mean, that was my experience as a mother, certainly. Yeah, differences can be rich. I don't think we ever want to be so much alike that,
Right.
That's the value in having a conversation with somebody that thinks differently than you do. You learn from one another. So, but where are we with feminism now? That's what we started out with.
That's a good question. Well,
let me tell you a little I was thinking about this on the way, something I would love to see happen. Maybe it could even start in Portland. One of the things that was so valuable to me in the second wave of feminism, getting together in these groups where we talked about our lives, was the sense of community that we got. And we've lost community not just among feminists, but among people in general. And, here we are, plugged in all the time, but we're not having these sort of flesh and blood conversations. And I sort of long to have a conversation or a forum or gatherings where old and young feminists can come together. And older feminists can support young women and be a resource for them, and we can also learn from them. So, I don't know, I would just like to sort of invite women who want to do this. What do they have to do? Call you? Can they email me if I give my email out?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, I have a really confusing email, so I need to change it. But for now, it's PP, that's 2 P's like in Paul, AREE, 2 E's like in Edward, 2011 at gmail.com. Yeah, I would be really happy to be a catalyst for a conversation like that.
Yeah, and you can also find the Soapbox on Facebook at facebook.com/the Soapbox Portland, and I can help connect you.
Oh, that'd
with,
be wonderful.
Anyone who gets in touch with me there
Yeah.
as well. So let's talk a little bit about what prompted you to bring Adolph Reed Jr. to Maine.
Oh, thank you, because
Yeah.
I do want to get that in.
Yeah.
Well, I was very moved by his feature story in Harper's Magazine in March. It was called Nothing Left, The Long, Slow Surrender of the Democratic Party. And he wrote essentially about how Democrats have sold out, have taken all their talking points from the Republicans because they thought that was the only way they could stay elected, and how they're only concerned about staying in office, how they've abandoned the progressive agenda, which is really working for equality. And I thought, wow, this is absolutely on the mark. So I just wrote him and said, would you be willing to come to Maine and talk? And he has some affection for Maine because he worked with the Labor Party here. He's the founder of the U.S. Labor Party. And he came here and spoke around 2000, I think. So he not only will elaborate on his thesis about how the left has sold out, and it's pretty interesting, but he promised to give us some ideas about how to build a new progressive movement, which I'm really interested in. Everybody should be interested in this.
Absolutely.
So can I give some details?
Absolutely, please.
So it's Saturday, May 10th in Brunswick at the Public Library, and it will be at 6:30, probably till about 8:30, and Adolph promised to give us a lot of time for questions.
Great.
So tell your friends and come. It's free. We may ask for donations, but if you can't cough up any, that's fine. You're most welcome.
And also, as it happens, Adolph Reed Jr. will be hopefully appearing on the Soapbox that following Wednesday. I don't know the date, but if the 10th is that Saturday, that following Wednesday, and then probably we'll break up the interview into 2 parts, depending on how much time I can get with him. So, but I strongly encourage you to both attend the meeting, the speech, and tune into the show. And next week, Dr. Richard Wolff will be here on campus at USM speaking. So you can find out more information about that on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/the Soapbox Portland. But Pat, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you,
is
Eric.
A wonderful conversation.
It was fun.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can have you back sometime, and we'll continue the conversation.
We'll keep storming the barricades.
That's right. Okay, thanks for tuning in, folks, and thank you to Ed for engineering tonight. Stick around for Nate, who's filling in for Byron this evening. Have a wonderful evening.
Small, but oh my. Yes, David was small, but oh my. He fought big Goliath, who lay down and died. Yes, David was small.